Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations for the Rankin Technical College AWD Application and Web Development 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class. The main textbook for the class is ASP.NET MVC with Entity Framework and CSS by Lee Naylor. Due to the fact that book is very code intensive but not very text or comment intensive, I've decided to first go through Professional ASP.NET MVC 5, which is a book by John Galloway of Microsoft and others. I have so far gone through Chapter 1, Getting Started, and Chapter 2, Controllers. So I now begin Chapter 3 on Views. As we can see here, here is what we'll be going over. The purpose of views, understanding view basics, View Conventions 101, all about strongly typed views, understanding view models, how to add a view, our first look at Razor, and how to specify a partial view. I should mention, if you look on the screen here, it says all code for this chapter is provided via NuGet, and I think it's probably also out on Git or GitHub someplace. But if you go out to here, let's grab this URL. Yeah, let's try it. Oh, wow. Okay. And right now it's saying, to me at least, that it can't find it. So there's the book, Professional ASP.NET MVC 5. So if you go out to rocks.com, W-R-O-X, that's the publisher, and you click here, it may not show, so you might have to click on ASP.NET. But sooner or later, you should be able to find the book, which again is Professional ASP.NET MVC 5. That's it. We look over here, there's a download code where you can download the code for every chapter starting with Chapter 3. Or you can download all of it at once. So if I click here, click the download, boom. It'll send it. In my case, it's going to send it to my downloads folder. All right? Okay, enough said with that. All right. Developers spend a lot of time focusing on crafting well-factored controllers and model objects, and for good reason. Clean, well-written code forms the basis of a maintainable web application. But when the user visits, they could care less about the model. They could care less about the controller. They want a good-looking view so they can get in, do what they want to do, and get out. So as it says, a user's first impression and entire interaction with your application starts with the view. All right, I would totally agree with that. If the rest of the application is buggy, no amount of spit and polish on the view will make up for it. So even if the view looks nice, if the regular app isn't very good, the user will know. All right, and if you've got a butt-ugly view, the user might never look at it, even if the controller and the model, etc., look nice. So in this chapter, the author says we won't show you how to make a pretty view. They do talk about visual design in here in some later places in the book. That's not what's important at this point in time. Rather, they're going to demonstrate how views work in ASP.NET MVC, what the responsibilities of views are, and the tools that you'll need to build views that the application will be able to use. So, the purpose of views here on page 50. Chapter 2 demonstrated how controllers can return strings, which are then output to the browser. The problem is, what we did in the last chapter is we used our controller as both the controller and, when we were returning those strings in there, it was also being used as the view. All right. It says if the controller actions are just returning strings, they'll be doing a lot of that, which gets messy fast. One of the highlights or hallmarks of Model View Controller or MVC coding is the fact that what it does is it has a separation of concerns. What does that mean? That means that the views, what gets shown, the user interface stuff that gets shown to the user, those are the views. All right. When the request comes in from the browser, how it gets handled, that's the controller. And the source of the data, be it a database or something else, and any business logic that goes along with that data, that's in the model. All right. So as it says here, the view is responsible for providing the user interface to the user. After the controller has executed the appropriate logic, it delegates the display part to the view. Views are not themselves directly accessible. You can't point your browser to a view and have it render. Views, rather than that, they're rendered or called, for lack of better words, by the controller. And the controller provides the data the view will render. It says in some simple cases, the view needs little or no information from the browser. From the controller. But more often, it's going to need information from the controller. View basics, starting on the bottom of page 50. We're going to start off slow. The easiest way to get the hang of what views do is to take a look at sample views that are created in a new web application. So we are supposed to open up views home index.cshtml from the project that we created earlier. And it's not going to look exactly like this, but it'll look very similar. So when we come back over here, we go under views, home, index.cshtml. There it is. Again, it has most of the code that you see on page 51. So it says aside from this bit of code here, it's just standard HTML. This gets called right here, this stuff in here gets called from our home controller right there. That says go out into the views menu, find a home folder, and find an index method that's in there, which is this, and render it. Show it. Run it. Whatever you want to say. So as you've seen, when we run this and we browse to the root of our site, there it is, home index. Remember, home slash index, they all do the same thing. They all show the home page. There it is. All right. Let's close that. And as the author says here, stop that run. Okay, that example was pretty basic. In the simplest case, you make a request to the controller which returns a view that's simply some static HTML. Easy to get started, but not dynamic. In other words, every time you run it, it's going to look the same. We said earlier that views offer a templating engine, so let's take advantage of that by passing some data from the controller to the view. All right. The easiest way to do this is by using something that's called ViewBag. All right. And you can look at ViewBag, for lack of better words, for right now. We can look at ViewBag as kind of being this magical, literally a bag that you can put stuff into and take out of. You can put things into the bag and take that stuff out as you see fit. So we're going to come in here and in our About, okay, it says take a look at the About action in the home controller. So let's take a look at that. Again, I think it's much easier to actually look at the code itself. All right. In fact, let's just close everything. We can always open it up later. We'll keep that About open. That's the one we want to see. So there it is. Remember, I added this is the MVC Music Store About page. All right. And we can use this area to give us additional stuff. That's what the system adds for you by default. So it says here, this view is really simple. It sets the page title right here. Remember, we reset it. So instead of About Page, it says MVC Music Store About Page. All right. Anytime you see characters within @ signs like this, that's called razor code. All right. What does that mean? Look at the extension of this file, .cshtml. That stands for C# Hypertext Markup Language. A CSHTML file is an HTML file that we can, if we choose to, embed C# code into. When we embed C# code, to let the system know what's coming is C# code, we put in an @ sign. If it's on multiple lines, we put it into an @ sign with a block, so we put them within curly braces. If it's not within multiple lines, we don't need the curly braces. We will talk about razor in this chapter, all right? So you'll see it more than once, all right? Understanding view conventions here on page 54, as the author mentions here. In the previous section, we looked at examples that illustrate how to use views to render HTML. Now we'll learn how ASP.NET MVC finds the correct view. The controller actions we've looked at so far either have just returned a string or returned a view. Okay? When you create a new project template, you get a views directory. And that views directory is set up in a specific way. All right? So there was our views directory. It has in it account for that account controller, home for that home controller, manage for that manage controller. Those we get by default. We added a store controller, which gave us right here. It gave us the store folder. All right. There's also a couple special things in here that we'll start to go over, like there's a view start. Okay, we'll go over all of this as we go on. Okay, let's just go back to our home and look at there. That's fine. So each controller folder contains a view file for each action method. And the file has the same name as the action method. This provides the basis for how you associate a view with the method that calls it. As with most things in ASP.NET MVC, as mentioned on page 55 at the top of the page, you can override this convention. Suppose you want the index method to render a different view. You could do that. So if we were to do something like this, the system would still look here, but rather than choosing the index.cshtml, it would look for the not index.cshtml. All right? You can also, as it says, use a tilde there, which means, for lack of better words, start at the root. All right. So far in this chapter, as mentioned here in the middle of page 55, we've looked at very simple examples that pass a little bit of data to the view in the view bag. Although the view bag is pretty simple for simple cases, when you work with real data, when you're passing all sorts of stuff, maybe a shopping cart app or whatever, it starts to fall short. It says, don't worry about typing this part, it's just for illustration. So the author says here, again, I'm not going to type this in. As mentioned, this is just for illustration. Suppose we need to write a view that displays a list of album instances. One way to do it would be to add the albums to the view bag. All right? So anything you say view bag dot there, okay? And then iterate over them. Okay? It says, note that you need to cast viewbag.albums to an IEnumerable. This is all stuff we'll go over. Enumerable basically means that it'll hold any type of data. We could have also used the dynamic keyword here to clean the view up. but the author says then you wouldn't get the IntelliSense. This literally says here, okay, grab all of our albums right there, shove them into this variable. Here we're shoving them into a variable called albums, and we're adding each one. Then shove them into our view bag, which we return and run through. It says it would be nice to have the clean syntax afforded by the dynamic example without losing the strong typing, etc. And it says this is where strongly typed views come in. All right? A strongly typed view lets you set a model type for the view. So in other words, at the beginning of the actual file, you say something like this: @model I enumerable MVC music store .models.album. It allows you, as it says here, to pass a model object from a controller to the view that's strongly typed on both ends. What does that buy you? It buys you the IntelliSense, so when you're starting to type something in, and you type in something like maybe the name of a controller, dot, it gives you the IntelliSense to try to help you to call the right thing. It does compiler checking, so if you have to pass any parameters, it makes sure those parameters are passed in the right order, the right data type, etc. And also, as it says in here, you can specify the model via an overload of the view method. All right, so this looks very similar to what we did before. But the next step, as it mentions here, is to indicate to the view what type of model is going to be being used. Note that you might need to fully qualify the model type, the namespace here, which is MVC Music Store, plus the type name, which is actually the namespace is MVC Music Store.models, and the type name, which is album. All right. If instead of typing all this at the beginning, so before this line, when we have your using statements at the top of the code there, if you put using MVC Music Store.models, then all you need to say is @model I enumerable album. So again, that using statement allows you to simplify the code that you put in. Yet another way that you can do this, if you're so inclined, as they mention here on page 57, is you can come in and you can add these namespaces, and that's what the using, what the using does, is it adds namespaces. You can add these namespaces in your web.config file within the views directory. Now, it's important to show you this. There is a web config file down here. That's not the one. We don't want that one. If you're going to do what they mention here, if you're going to do that, we want the web config that's right here. That's the one in your views directory. All right. All right. Bottom of page 57. Understanding view bag, view data, and view data dictionary. We'll do this and then we'll end part 1 of this lecture and begin part 2. It says we started out by talking about view bag, using it to pass information from the controller to the view. Then we moved to passing a strongly typed model. In reality, both of these are passed via something that's called the view data dictionary. And what the author says here is you saying viewbag.currentTime is the same thing as doing it this way. So this is equivalent to this. They will both work. Generally, people use the dot syntax. You don't have to, but by convention, that's what most people tend to use. All right? And the author says here in this gray box that's in the middle of page 58, just for your edification, that there are some differences between these. It says one obvious difference is that viewbag works only when the key you're accessing is a valid C# identifier. All right. Why is that a big thing? Well, I think you're making it a little harder on yourself to use the dictionary stuff. It's a little bit more work because the system may or may not understand what it is you're trying to do. You cannot pass in dynamic values as parameters to extension models. So if you try to do certain things by using the ViewBag dictionary, it very well could fail. All right? Before we jump into view models, which is the next part of the chapter, let's stop this lecture and start on a new one.